Well, good morning, Pittsburgh. How you doing?
Good morning. I am doing well. The city here, apropos of your NFL North t-shirt that you're wearing, the city is consumed with Aaron Rodgers rumor mongering at the moment, but that will probably be resolved by the time this publishes. So we're living in this weird liminal space here between what we know and what the listeners and viewers know.
So by the time this airs, would you be happy if there was an Aaron Rodgers addition to the Steelers?
I would be happy, since my relationship with the Steelers is more about entertainment than about really being a fan of theirs. I think the Steelers fandom is pretty divided and mostly leaning against, but not like there are a lot of other good options available either. So,
well, I mean, he's quite a specimen, that guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
That he is. How about you, Dave? What's going on down there in Little Rock, Arkansas?
Oh, extreme weather. Today it's balmy. Other days we had people surfing on highways. That's not even a joke.
Yeah, I saw pictures of not the surfing, but of the flooding. It's not good.
Yes. Well, this guy was he was pulled along by a car along the highway, and he was surfing or water skiing.
You make the most of what nature gives you, I guess, would be. I mean,
I feel like that's Arkansas really punching above its weight. Like, we are not known. We got lakes, we got the Ozarks, we got all of that, but we are not known as a beachfront place. But man, if we can surf highways,
there's no Arkansas related verse in Surfin' USA that I can recall. Yeah.
No. I mean, we got the Southern Farmer's Daughters or whatever. No, it's the
Midwest
Southern Girls.
Farmer's Daughter. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are my people.
But that's not Surfing USA. That's California Girls, right?
Well, yeah, but same band, right? Yeah. Isn't it?
Same band, and all their songs are basically the same anyway. So there's some interestingness there. And I know. I know everybody says that, and they're just not right.
Oh, this is a good one. We can yeah. Oh, this is good. I'm going to drag you to the mainstream for once. Okay.
All right. Well,
or not. You might be so damn pig-headed I can't get you anywhere. We'll just see.
That's the story of my life generally, but okay. We'll see how this goes. Anyway, Dave, we've gotten off topic here. And what we're really here to talk about today is TV. And what, pray tell, was your favorite television show in the year 1987?
Yes, in the year of our Lord, 1987, decades.
Not my Lord particularly, but yeah.
Oh, well, yes. Okay, there's that. So, of course, I was at boarding school and didn't have much television access except during the summer when I would watch.
Boarding school.
Always with the boarding school. That's gonna come up a lot. Man of the people that I am. So there wasn't much watching going on in those days, except for the kids who snuck TVs into their rooms. They were not allowed, and that was a pretty tall order to pull off. But then in the summers, I was mainly just watching 120 Minutes in MTV. But if there was a recurring show I did try to catch in that year, it would have probably been Miami Vice, which we have discussed.
We have.
How about you?
I would say, and probably this would be my answer for what was my favorite television show in any year that started with the numbers 198, and it would be The Late Show with David Letterman, which, I just loved. And I think 87, I was in college already and would, at least a couple nights a week, definitely, me and there were other people in the dorm would stay up and straggle down to the lounge at 12:30 or whatever time it was that it was on then, and watch until the infomercials started rolling and try to sound like Dave in our ordinary conversation and generally sound like idiots instead. But that was where we were.
And then you launched a podcast, which we will always deny has anything to do with him and its naming, but
But in fact, we are here on Stupid Gen X Tricks, the show for people who used to be cool. Episode 7, TV Party Tonight, which when I wrote that down for myself to read was the first time that I really felt a big pang of regret that we can't afford to pay for music rights, because I would love to be able to roll that song right now.
Yes. Okay, I just got to dial back a quick second before we go into the next thing. Letterman, everyone loved Letterman. I too loved Letterman. I probably didn't watch it with the same frequency that you did, but I mean, this is scripted television we're covering today. That's a bit of a cop-out. Give me a scripted show you were watching.
Okay, so 87, I got to think. I mean, well, Cosby, probably. You kind of cringe to admit these days, but I loved The Cosby Show. Absolutely.
Even as were you out of college in 87?
No, I was in college.
You're in.
And in fact, 87, I can't remember which year it was, but there was one year where I lived in a dorm that housed a black student center, or whatever it was called, that was so there was a concentration of black kids in the dorm. And man, when The Cosby Show was on, it was like everybody was in that lounge watching that, and it was like a major cultural moment for people.
That's cool. Were you hot for Lisa Bonet?
I think you're using the wrong tense there.
Oh, you mean do you remain hot for Lisa Bonet?
I might. If my wife is listening, I'm sorry, but that's facts are facts.
Yes. Yeah. Had Angel Heart come out yet, or was that must have been later, maybe 90s?
Yeah, I think that was later.
That's a great one. And I feel like a little overlooked these days, but that was a heck of a movie. All right. So yes, television, and that is the topic of today. We're going to really get into it.
Yeah, and it's another one of those things like technology where we and our peer set really lived on the cusp of two different worlds, right? I mean, we grew up in still the three dominant networks having a monopoly or a near monopoly on what people watched, and that really
HBO starting to elbow in a little bit, but not a ton.
But I don't think they had started doing original programming yet at that point, had they?
That's a good, yeah, they may not have been. Maybe it was just for movies in the 80s.
Yeah. I mean, and there were other, right, like depending on where you lived. I mean, I grew up in New York, so we had local channels that had
Channel 35. Was that what you were watching?
No, we had, I mean, there was channel, there were the three network channels, and then there was, which were 2, 4, and 7, and there was 13 was PBS. Mm-hmm. But then we had, 5 and 9 and 11 that were all three local stations that mostly showed reruns and old movies and local sports, right? So, you had the Mets on Channel 9 and the Yankees on Channel 11, and, the Knicks and Rangers were both on 9, and,
okay.
This is fascinating to very few people.
Yeah, what time were the Knicks on? Was Albert King still playing for them?
Yeah, he definitely was. But the point is that that obviously the world changed very quickly from that and into something now where we have this almost absurd diversity of things to watch and very little common culture. Right, where, it used to be just routinely that network shows that were even a little bit popular, 20% of the country would be watching the same show at the same time and going into work or school the next day and talking about them.
McCormick and Mrs. King, right? Isn't that what it was called?
That was a show, yeah. I don't think I ever saw that particular one, but lots and lots and lots of people did. Okay,
so there was, in this era and in that year you mentioned, 1987, quite a watershed moment. And it was something that I was aware of, but never really watched until just a few days ago, which was the first show on Fox, I believe, Married with Children.
Yeah. Yeah, it was their first show. And we have a great guest to have that conversation with, Richard Gurman, who was a writer-producer throughout that show's 10-year run. But before that had worked on a bunch of shows that really defined, childhood for a lot of people in our generation. Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley and Mork and Mindy and all those things as Yeah, he also All in the Family. So, it'll be exciting. You lived in a world that had a very different relationship to TV than I think most people did. I did to some extent too, but you much more so from what I've gathered.
Yes, and I just want to point out we do attempt a bit of a script in these things, and I particularly like the part that we're at right now where it reads, and this was scripted by Mr. Selden, DA, talk about your weird childhood. So,
and then the response, of course, DS, talk about my only slightly less weird childhood.
Yes, yeah. True. So, yeah. My mother was, in charge of the household more or less, and, pretty much. And she did not believe in television. She thought it was brain rot before brain rot was the incredibly annoying thing it is right now. And, she would have been happy not to even have a television in the house or just to have it for national emergencies or whatever. So I really was not allowed to watch television much at all, which, like the other things that were withheld from me became lifelong cravings, whether it was watching Woody Woodpecker or SpaghettiOs. These were things I was not allowed, and I still enjoy to this day. Well, I say that about Woody Woodpecker, but not really. But anyway, I had 3 hours a week.
I ever enjoyed that one. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have it, so I wanted it. Although Kraft mac and cheese never grew on me, and that was something everyone else had and that I craved for a while there.
And that I could eat every day if I was allowed to.
Who knows? Can't blame Mom for everything. But but I had 3 hours a week of television. That was it when it was and I used it mainly to watch the Little Rascals, the old black and white Little Rascals, because that was my favorite thing most of the time through my childhood. So that was it. And then I went into television, which Mom noted was ironic given how much it had been limited from me as a child. And I don't think that was a coincidence at all, of course.
Yeah, that's really funny. Yeah, my house, my parents did not limit our TV watching in that same way. They just communicated by their own distaste for most mainstream programming, what they thought was good and what's not. They were definitely big PBS watchers, as well as, in my father's case, sports watchers, but they did not deny us the pleasures of Happy Days and the rest. And as a result, I actually managed to pick up on some of their disdain, so that like by high school, there were a lot of shows that all my friends were really into that I took this sort of snobbish, like, ooh, that's trash kind of approach to, that made me really popular.
Yeah. Snobbery is always the path to winning friends.
Yeah, especially in high school.
Yes. All right. That takes us to guest time. And before we do that, we want to remind everyone to like, subscribe, smash the record button. I do. That's such an annoying thing you hear like influencers say in their YouTube videos, but it's so annoying. I kind of like it. So I'm going to keep using that.
It's
anyway,
another
please
one of those things I feel like started out as a Britishism that people just started picking up, which makes it, to my mind, doubly annoying. But
yeah, well, I'm a bit of an Anglophile, so that is not a disqualifier in my brain. But yes, I hear you. And but really, it matters. It really does matter. Please do tell people about us. Please do like each episode, as long as you can feel good about that, and comment and all those things, because they give us momentum, and we need that, because we are small. We're mighty, but we are small. So we want to grow, and we need your help. So thank you in advance for that.
I also think it's quite possible that if you fail to do that as one of our listeners, something very terrible might happen to you, and It might be because of that, and we don't want that to happen.
Yeah, it could, like that bird dropping is not an accident. It was the gods punishing you for not subscribing. All right. Well, so it looks like maybe we have a guest awaiting our arrival in the lobby. Should we take a quick break and then invite him in?
Absolutely. Great.
All right. We will be right back.
So we're back on Stupid Gen X Tricks, and we are joined now by our guest, Richard Gurman. Richard worked in Hollywood, still working in Hollywood for over 35 years, writing, producing, show-running such popular TV shows and really staples of the Gen X childhood, and it is an embarrassment of riches rolling through this list. Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, Different Strokes, Facts of Life, Married with Children and Still Standing. He is the author of this book, Married with Children versus the World, which is what we're mainly going to be talking about, or that show is mainly what we're going to be talking about. But let's start a little bit first with your earlier career.
Richard, you got your start with, as I read it, Norman Lear, and I wondered what that was like, and what did you learn from him that you took forward?
I actually got my start before that with Gary Marshall, another king of the sitcom universe. And I worked on Laverne and Shirley as an apprentice writer, and I worked on Happy Days as a story editor. And they were both just fantastic experiences, one very different from the other. Laverne and Shirley was very tumultuous. The girls were just unabashedly opinionated, and it trickled down to the writer's room, and it was, but it was always fun to see what they did with the material, because they were such great physical comedians. And Happy Days was just this strong institution that, sort of centered around the Fonz and Richie. And it was a totally new experience in working in the group process. And, as a sitcom writer, you work as a group, as a team, and very much the team leader, in this case, Gary, determines your fate a lot. And then I went over eventually, after a couple of other shows, to the Norman Lear Company, but I kind of got there right as Norman was leaving, as he sold the show. But there's still the spirit of Norman, the adventure, the bravado, kind of the liberal values and so on, were still very much there when I got to Norman's company.
That's great. And was TV writing always the goal for you, or did you start out with other intentions?
It's funny, I got out of graduate school. I was a documentary filmmaker. I had made a documentary film for my master's thesis, and I came to Los Angeles to interview for jobs in documentary film, and somebody handed my resume to somebody at the Partridge Family, of all things, and they said, come and work as an assistant to the producer of the Partridge Family. So I figured I might as well come to LA on a job rather than not on a job. So I came and I worked on the Partridge Family, and I fell in love with sitcoms, and I stayed with it ever since, sort of walking away from documentary. But then on the other side of my career, my sitcom career, I've also made documentaries. I made one about Bob Hope for PBS for American Masters, and more recently I made one about my mentor Gary Marshall for ABC. So I've kind of come full circle.
What did you find so appealing in the sitcom world?
The group process is just thoroughly amazing. You come into a room, and whether you're at the early stages of writing a script or whether you're actually producing a show, depending on what time of the year it is, and you sit and there's a pecking order, there's a leader, there's an executive producer, and then all the way down the line. And you work together to create jokes, to create stories, and there's just something about the building. One person suggests a line, and then that takes somebody else on another run, and then you end up with something, like a third possibility. So it's really hard work. You have to produce a show every week, but you come in with a group of kind of like-minded people, and there's a lot of diversity in terms of age and race and experience, and you all work together every single day to get out a product. And as difficult as it is, it's really fun.
From your book and other things I've read and heard about that sort of sitcom development process, the thing that always strikes me is how compressed the timeline is, and how much just sort of
yes,
deadline, constant pressure you're operating under.
Yeah, it certainly is a lot of pressure. I mean, you come in for a couple of months of what's called pre-production, and you get X number of scripts written for let's say they've ordered 22 or 24, you get X number of them written. And then you go into production, and production is this 5-day schedule where you start by reading a script informally on Monday, let's say, and then you do some rewriting, and then on Tuesday they rehearse, Wednesday they rehearse, Thursday they rehearse, and after each rehearsal you do more rewriting and refining, and then Friday they shoot the show and it's gone, it's done, and then you start over again. So there is a lot of time pressure. It's very compressed. It's like putting on a play in a week. And that's kind of the good and the bad of it. At some point, you have to live with things that might not be perfect. And then on the other hand, you have opportunities every day to improve the script because you see it as a living, breathing product. And you can change things right up until the last minute, when the audience is there. If a joke doesn't work in front of the audience, which is the real test, you have alternatives in the bag, or else you come up with something right there on the stage. So it's a very compressed, nothing gets stale, let's put it that way, because by the end of the week, you have to start over next week.
Richard, something that strikes me as so different in that era of, I guess, monoculture, is that what they call it? Where there were so many less media outlets than current times. You must have had a very clear sense that, like, when you're mentioning some of these shows, I'm recalling as a kid discussing these shows hours after they had broadcast because every kid in the class had watched them. And that you must have had a pretty clear sense that your influence was ginormous back then, and that what you wrote in a room radiated out in a way that it just nothing can anymore.
Rennie and Squiggy were major figures in my childhood.
Hello.
Yeah. What did that? What was that like? You must have. I assume you had a sense of that. Did it inform the process?
You always felt good if you were out someplace, you were overhearing a conversation, and someone coughed up a line that you wrote or talked about. You always like that. But you never work backwards from that. You never say, I'm going to try to get something into the vernacular. It doesn't quite work that way. So, when there's a successful show, when there's a successful moment, when somebody says something that ultimately becomes a catchphrase, it is rewarding. And it's rewarding to be in a social situation. And when someone says, oh, you worked for that show, I love that show. It's very rewarding. You feel like you're part of the popular culture. And by the way, I mean, it still happens. That was my favorite show. That was I get a lot of that was my father's favorite show. It's very rewarding. You feel like you're part of and the universe was much more closed. It wasn't streaming. It wasn't, it was ABC, NBC, and CBS. And that is very much part of the origin of Married with Children, was the fact that it was this it was this linear closed universe. And there wasn't like you couldn't like watch a show just when you wanted to because it was streaming or because you DVR'd it. And the whole idea was you sat down and you watched a network at 8 and 8:30. They tried to capitalize on it, like NBC had must-see TV and get people. Right. So in order to break in, the whole idea to create a fourth network, and there hadn't been a fourth network for like 50 years. There hadn't been a new network for 50 years. The whole idea from Fox's point of view, and remember, these are kind of conservative guys. This is Rupert Murdoch and Barry Diller. And the whole idea was, we're going to create this network, and in order to get people to watch, to break their habits of linear viewing on the other networks, we have to do something out of the box. We have to do something outrageous. So they went to all these executive producers, Ron Levitt and Michael Moy, who are the creators of this show, and they went to Jim Brooks, and they went to Ed Weinberger, and they said to them, we will give you more freedom than you get on the network if you come and work for us. Because you weren't incentivized to work. I mean, these people were top of their game, and they were making tons of money that Fox couldn't pay them on the other networks, and they were getting viewership that Fox couldn't possibly deliver. So the thing that they had to do was to say, we will give you creative freedom. And they went to Levitt and Moy, and they said, we'll give you creative freedom. And they came up with Married with Children. The whole genesis of the show had to do with sort of an economic, a business. Yes, it was a creative decision, but it was very much based on the business of the time, of the 80s, how things were running.
So that's a great transition. I gather from your book that you agree with this, that Married was a kind of a watershed moment in a lot of ways for the culture. And one of the reasons was just it was the introduction of Fox and the beginning of this transition away from the 3-network monopoly into the craziness that we have on television now. Another piece of it was really to do with the reaction to it. And that's, I mean, where I came into Married with Children, I don't think I was aware of it when it first aired, but was from hearing about, there's these crazy ladies in Michigan who are trying to stop this thing because it's so crass and disgusting. And then, I was like, well, crass and disgusting, I'm going to watch that. Yeah. And, I think the fact that it triumphed over that, was kind of this moment of like, hey, being against the blue stockings and being against the people saying that this is bad is a recipe for success and for attracting people. And I feel like that's something that we've seen play out a lot. Talk about how that felt at the time and what you thought.
Sure. For the first couple of seasons, Married was just humming along. I mean, pretty good for Fox, but just terrible in the network universe in terms of the ratings. But Fox kept renewing it because it was one of the prettiest girl in Cincinnati. It was good for them, but kept going. And then in the third year, there was a show that was a little bawdier than most of the shows. It's where Peggy, her bra has been discontinued, and she's in a fit about it, and Al, the good husband, goes to this place in Milwaukee or someplace where he knows they have these bras in stock, and he walks in, and it's like is Fredericks of Hollywood a reference that anyone knows? Yeah. Trashy lingerie.
We're old enough
it's like it's like this trashy lingerie store where women are walking around and they're in modeling underwear and it's just wild. So Al thinks he's gone to heaven, and he, as far as faints when he sees one particular woman, and the end of the story is he brings the bra back to Peggy and she's happy. Okay, so there's a woman in Michigan named Terry Ricolta who's plugged into the politics of she's an in-law of the Romney family or something like that. And she was
childhood
watching
neighbors
the show by her own description. What? Oh, really?
The Romneys lived in East Lansing for a little bit.
Oh, really? Okay. So I interviewed her for the book, and she was actually very interesting and very amenable to talk about the whole thing. So by her own account, she was watching the show on a treadmill with her 2 young kids, and she started to see, bras and women in undergarments and so on. She sent the kids out, and then she got very upset about it. So she called Fox, and she told them, that was inappropriate, particularly for the hour that it was on. It was on like at 8 o'clock, and adult stuff usually comes on at 9 under the old rules when there was linear television. It goes back to that. And in any event, she didn't get any satisfaction from them. They really weren't set up to have kind of customer relations. It was sort of the newness of the network had something to do with how this went afoul. And so she didn't get any satisfaction from them. She went directly to the advertisers, and the advertisers were like Procter and Gamble and Tam Brands and, all kinds of really big sponsors. And the sponsors went to the network and said, you have to examine this and make some changes. And meanwhile, she became a media darling. She, there was no such thing as viral in that sense now, but she was viral then. She was on late night talk shows. She was on morning talk shows. There were articles about her on the front page of the New York Times, on the front page of the Washington Post. And this story just mushroomed, and so Fox was was concerned, and they told the advertisers that they would look more closely at the episodes as they came by, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, as you just sort of indicated through your own personal story, it caught the attention of America, of viewers. Hey, this crazy kind of bawdy show is going on, and the ratings went up, 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 up. So, it's the cliche, no publicity is bad publicity. And she sort of fostered in a whole new era where people, the show caught on. Because of this publicity mill. And there was one big piece of fallout. There was one show later in the season. Again, it wasn't any particularly bawdier than any of the other shows that they decided to not put on the air because they thought it was, too outrageous. Fox decided not to put on the air, and they actually took it out of the package, and it wasn't on until like 10 or 12 years later when the show went to syndication and when the show got on DVDs and so on.
There's a sense as you watch the show as it goes on, right, of kind of glorying in, we know we're being bad and we're saying stuff that some people aren't going to like, and that's why we're saying it, and that's what makes it funny. And, Al kind of laughing at things that he says himself just carries that sense that I feel like in the years that followed really became pervasive in the culture.
I agree. I think it had a tremendous influence, and we can talk about that. But there are two things, as you were just discussing that, which is very accurate, that I think are important to note. It wasn't just being outrageous for the sake of being outrageous. It was satirical. And it followed the form of a traditional sitcom. There was a beginning, a middle, and an end. There were neighbors. There were bosses. There was trouble at work. There was trouble at home. There were sex issues. There were kids, that needed attention. And all of those sort of touchstones that people were used to in the Cosby Show, which was popular then, in Growing Pains, in, Who's the Boss? And so there was a comfort, I think, that accompanied that made the outrageousness go down easier, and it made it actually funnier. And I think that was totally the intent of the creators of the show. And the other thing that allowed us to get away with it was that there was this no matter how outrageous and crazy and angry they got at each other, there was always this sense, and this is true of traditional sitcoms, that they were always going to be together, that by the end of the show, they would patch it up. And, Peggy gave as good as she got. I mean, she was as strong a woman as he was a man, and that was intentional too. So you didn't feel just sorry for her, and the kids were outrageous too. And on the surface, it seems like just kind of throwing shit at the wall, but underneath it was a structure that understood how to make it even more popular than just being lewd.
That's really interesting. And of course, you talk about these elements of shows with the familiarity of a creator across decades, but some of those, like the fact that you divide out all those little subsections of like trouble at work, trouble at home, sex issues, the kids, the attention, that's like, I never studied television, so I didn't know that those were such touchstones of the formula, but it makes perfect sense. And then that your point about the familiarity you're tapping even as you restructure the character types is kind of wonderful. Sort of in that vein, you didn't hear the part where I was limited to 3 hours of television a week as a child by a mother who hated television. So I missed a lot of stuff, and I was always the one at school who was like,
3 hours a week.
It was horrible. And I whether it was Partridge Family or Happy Days, everyone was talking about what happened last night at school. And I'm like, I don't know. I was like the only kid who didn't know it happened. So I'm curious, my retroactive impression of characters and popular shows of that era was that they were aggressively middle class and periodically upper class, Dallas or something, and then sometimes working class. But this was a very working class family, and Al working at the shoe store and really being an also ran in the world of professional aspiration. How unique was that among shows that were on at that time?
It was very unique. I mean, and that was part of the idea, to make them underdogs from the get-go. And obviously, look at what it spawned. You've got Roseanne, and you've got so many other shows that followed that formula to find the humor in that. And then, of course, when you find the humor in that, it's always fun to run it against someone upper class who walks into the store or who wants to do some changes in the neighborhood or something like that. And we even had a built into that was the neighbors who were bankers. I mean, they weren't super rich. They were still living next to the Bundys, but they were yuppies, and they would come over having just parked their Mercedes, and they had just gone out to a fancy dinner, and and Al could kind of try and corrupt Steve, and Peggy would kind of try and corrupt Marcy. So that almost on a daily basis, the working class guy that you're talking about.
And it does, I mean, it has always struck me, like, again, thinking about the things that the show signaled about what was coming in the world, that the Marcy figure, right, as like, let's have the yuppie upper class educated liberal woman be the kind of figure of mockery. And then as the show went on, occasionally bring out these moments of, see, really what she wants is just to be a real woman and get dragged down to everybody else's level. Definitely became a kind of a trope in the world going forward in a way that I think stands out when I look back at the show.
Yeah. And that was satisfying to see the influence of, look at Family Guy, there's so many other shows that came along that decided to go in that direction. Roseanne, obviously, and the Connors and so on. Yeah.
We haven't talked about the most important character on the show, and that's Buck.
Buck. Yeah. Buck was a family fixture, just like you have a family dog, and then at a certain point we had him talk. And he was voiced alternately by one or more of the writers on the show, but famously by Cheech Marin a couple of times. And he was your loyal dog, and you'd hear his voice over, and he'd be sarcastic about the family and what was going on, and make little comments. Famously, there was an episode where he had impregnated a lot of dogs in the neighborhood, and the neighbors were upset about it. So there was a division. They decided it divided along lines of Peggy and Al as to whether they would get him fixed. And then it became man, woman, sex, no sex. Then it just transferred into their own kind of bickering about it. And that was a very funny episode.
Yeah. In watching episodes recently, one thing I was really struck by was the ubiquity of Ed O'Neill in our culture. And now with Modern Family, which is a show that my daughter, she's watched every episode over and over, falls asleep to them.
Right.
And seeing the kind of family he's a part of there compared to what he was in Married with Children, and there are real threads that I think are based around his personality and casting.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what you think when you see him these days, having come from these roots.
Well, it's interesting. I want to go back to a real root, and then I'll come back to this story, which is Ed getting cast. And
which was one of the great bits of the book.
In the initial casting sessions, Katie was approved, David Garrison was approved, Amanda was approved, and then Ed did his scenes, and everyone was saying, well, Ed is very good, and Barry Diller says, I think you can do better. And he walked out of the room. And then, but he said, do what you want, meaning go ahead and cast him if you want, but I think you can do better. And he walked out of the room, and his executives and our executives said, well, we want, we still very strongly want him. Barry found out about it later, and he said, I won't stand for this will not fly with me. And they said, do what you want. You said do what you want. And he says, yeah, but I didn't mean it. And Barry took action. The original order was for 13 episodes on the air, which was another incentive for these writers. They didn't have to do a pilot and then get chosen off the pilot as to whether they were going to go on the air. They automatically had 13 on the air. Well, over the Ed O'Neill issue, Barry Diller called the studio and said, you're no longer 13 on the air. You're going to do a pilot, and if I like Ed O'Neill, then we're going to go ahead. If not, you lose your whole show. And so the pilot was charged with this atmosphere that Barry Diller was going to look at Ed O'Neill and decide, whether he was going to fly or not. And, he ended up liking him and ordering the other 12. But it was really up in the air as to whether we were going to have a series based on Diller's aversion to Ed O'Neill.
Did O'Neill know that in real time?
Back to your... He knew it. He sort of knew it, but he knew that Diller didn't like him, but he didn't know that the whole thing was contingent, nor did we want to tell him because it would have driven him crazy. And he says now, looking back, he's glad he didn't know, because it's nerve-wracking enough. And then later on some other context, Ed was doing a movie on the Fox lot or something, and Diller saw him, and he said, I was wrong about you. And then Ed said, we all make mistakes. So that was that. Okay, so back to your original statement. At around season 6 or 7, Ed started feeling that he was so typecast as Al Bundy that he would never get another job again. I mean, you can say, oh, boo-hoo, you're making millions here, and, why are you causing a... But he was really disgruntled, and there were times on the set where he said, I don't want to do that joke because it's too Al Bundy. And I said, you are Al Bundy, you didn't get struck by lightning or something. You have... Yeah, and he did it. He sucked it up and he did it. But he was very disgruntled, and he also felt he would go out in public and people would call him Al, and they'd stick their hand down their pants and they would just, talk about signature moves. And then at a certain point he realized that this was selfish and that the audience only knew him as Al. They didn't know him as Ed O'Neill. And of course they're going to come up to him and want him to be in character Al. And, so looking back, he is sort of apologetic for going through that phase. And he certainly has risen above it. He's been cast in all kinds of things in dramas, and he was recently in that, the thing about the Clippers. He's been in serious dramas, which actually was his background. But, I don't think we have to hold any charity fundraisers for Ed O'Neill. He's done very good. And I think I know at this point he is at peace with what really bothered him before. And, he should be.
Well, it's a testament to him, right, that he can be so deeply ingrained in people's minds as one character and then still be able to be good enough in other things to overcome that.
Every actor's goal.
Yeah.
And it's a testament to the people who hired him for other roles, too, that they were able to see past that.
My favorite part of the book was when Sam Kinison came in to guest star. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, I actually wasn't there that year, but I have firsthand accounts. Sam Kinison, to go way back, Sam Kinison and Roseanne were offered the parts of Al and Peggy by the studio before casting ever began. And this was much to the dismay of the creators of the show, who didn't want comics with built-in characters to portray these roles. Obviously, they turned them down. And so there was obviously some backstory, but Ron and Michael, who created the show, loved Sam Kinison. And actually, funny enough, that was you call it an elevator pitch. Their elevator pitch for the show was, what if Sam Kinison and Roseanne Barr got married and had kids? That never intending for Roseanne and Sam to actually be those people. But so Sam came. There's a special 2-part episode called A Wonderful Life, which is a takeoff on A Wonderful Life. And Sam Kinison played the angel who comes back down to basically give salvation to the main character, who in this case was Ed O'Neill, who was questioning whether anybody liked him on Earth, and his whole mission was to show that they did. Although in our episode, he showed that they could do better without him. That was the twist on it. But he came and he was just undisciplined and outrageous. And on one of the first days of rehearsal, he mooned the cast from the wings. I mean, you have to understand, as loosey-goosey as the content was, you have to have a show in 5 days. So there was a very much of a discipline on the stage. In spite of how outrageous the content was, you still have to be professional actors. And he came in and he mooned the cast, and then he realized he was out of line, or he got the feedback, and that night he invited them all to a dinner at Spago, which was his birthday dinner, and everyone just, thought that was great. Then the next day or the day after, he came late to rehearsal. And they were upset that he's cutting into their rehearsal time and sort of offsetting the discipline. So to make up for that, he had a catered lunch for them during lunchtime, and he had it served by strippers that he hired. So again, he made nice. And ultimately, he gave a hell of a performance in the show, and the show has become a classic. So, he was, I think, of all the guest stars that we've had in 11 years, the most problematic in a way, but he was also one of the most effective. So that's Sam.
That's great. All right. So I guess should we? We have a wrap up question. I don't want to miss anything.
Yeah, we should let Richard go, and but first give him our concluding thoughts here.
Yes. Well, and also we have a question we ask everybody, and we want to put it to you, which is off topic. It's not about television. It is, what was the first record you ever bought?
First record I ever bought was probably Bob Dylan.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Would it have been one of the early one of the folky ones? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good answer. Good answer. Much better answer than a lot of people.
Yeah, David had Captain and Tennille.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Really?
Yeah. You got to start with something, right?
Yeah. Dylan on it's a very colorful photo, and I think like a Rolling Stone is on I don't know. Anyway,
it's the one where he's like walking down the street in Greenwich Village. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, we did have.
Well, there's that one too. I was between those two, trying to think of which, in my mind, which came first. But the one walking down the street with that woman certainly strikes a bell. Maybe just the image.
It's so much cooler than our first albums. I mean, of course, it's hard to outdo Dylan, but also the fact that you, a writer, a great writer, an extremely accomplished writer, would have chosen one of the greatest writers of all music history as your first album. Like you were a kid of taste and sophistication, clearly.
Yeah, I try not to be too intellectual about it, but yeah. I mean, I like the Monkees too, and I like the Byrds, and I like, I was pretty eclectic, but Dylan certainly was my favorite.
All right.
So we did have a TV specific wrap up question too, which was just if you're, we're going to wrap up here, whatever your day consists of. Let's pretend for the moment that you're going to go turn this off and go sit in front of the TV and watch something. What are you going to be watching?
I just finished watching The Pit. I think there's one more episode left, and I'm waiting for that. And I really like that. Not an outrageous comedy, but kind of an outrageous doctor show. If there's another episode
hard to watch at times just because it's so bloody. But yeah.
And such an interesting concept of each hour being an hour. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I live in Pittsburgh, and a lot of our friends are doctors, and so everybody's very into it.
Oh, okay. Is it relatable?
None of them are ER docs, but everybody thinks that it's pretty accurate to life, and like all the little Pittsburgh references in it are very accurate and very much capture the feel of things. And it actually like was shot on site, at least part of it, at the hospital. Over on the North Shore. Well,
Richard, you've been immense to come on the show with us and sharing these incredible tales. I feel like we could go on for many more segments. There's so much to hear. And a reminder to our audience that there's a wonderful book that you've authored. And David, you want to hold it up one more time? That is available at finer bookstores. And that was a little fast. Okay, Married with Children versus the World.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Richard. It's really been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks so much, Richard.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
We're back. That was fascinating. He was great. Thanks again to Richard for participating and writing a great book about these like essential times in the history of television. And it's kind of amazing to think about how the world has changed in all these years. When you see common threads that flow through things that continue even to this day, obviously just knowing that someone like Richard is still doing storytelling on a prominent scale, I kind of find that comforting. And as we discussed with him, seeing Ed O'Neill as a very different kind of character in Modern Family and knowing that he's had a very full career is also kind of wonderful.
Yeah, and it's just the TV is such a different world, and obviously we're not the first people to ever notice this, but just, looking back at old episodes of this or of any sitcom from that era or before to the nature of what we see today, obviously like somebody going bra shopping is like tame, first of all, but also like the qualitative difference in the way that stories are told and in the sort of the old studio setup with the live audience, it's just so different now than it used to be. And I think in many ways better. But I miss a little bit of that old sense of, hey, we all watched Seinfeld last night. Let's talk about it over lunch. And, even having that little brief conversation with him there about the pit, and the fact that there's one more episode to go, as we sit here now, there's just something missing in society when we don't have those kinds of common points of reference. And it would be nice even if those common points of reference were something more elevated than TV shows, but we got what we got.
Yeah. And there's an upside to that, as we know. I mean, there's just way more good television, and it also shouldn't be lost that right before you and I came on air with this, we were talking about a show that it turned out we both had watched, Adolescence, that was, really
right.
powerful. And then he named a show that you had just watched and was relevant in your right. community. So it's not completely gone. It does happen, but you just can't count on virtually everyone having seen the thing. Like, you think about these days, what is it you can count on that everyone knows about? And it's got so many times you can't, even if you think it is, but I mean, really, sports is is maybe the only place.
Sports and maybe one or two big. Like, I feel like the Oscars maybe hits that.
I don't think
that
it does.
level.
No, people don't watch it. Like certain, like Barbie, kind of felt that way. Yeah. Oppenheimer, yeah. Certain like mega hits in culture, I guess, approach it, but it's really quite different.
I mean, I find. Really, whenever a new episode of Stupid Gen X Tricks hits, that like everybody's talking about
yeah,
it.
That's true. That's true. I mean, we're bringing people back around the campfire here. It's kind of amazing. Yeah, that's something we can all take comfort in.
In particular, they're always talking about the wormholes.
Yes, they are, and it's become a real focus of fascination in the culture, and I'm kind of proud of it. I hear people talking about the wormholes when I go to pick up some McDonald's. It's kind of wild. So yeah, let's hear it. You got a wormhole for us today, David?
Yeah, so definitionally, the wormholes are supposed to be things that are sort of fact-based things that we've uncovered over the week or so since the last taping, in the mode of the middle-aged guys that we are who like to bore our families telling them new things. I kind of came up with a dry well this time and didn't have anything. And so I followed the advice that writing teachers give, which is dig into your own life and your own experience. And so I thought I would just share with people as my wormhole this week, a little thing that is usually on my shelf behind me here while we tape, which is this rock, which is a thing that I deeply love, which I painted this in kindergarten. And that's not what I love about it. What I love about it is that my grandparents held on to it until they died, which was a long time afterwards. It didn't hold a pride of place. It was a doorstop that was my grandmother using for a while, I remember. But like, they had it, and it just gives me a warm feeling that this little thing that I did had a life beyond that. And we are, as we tape, getting ready for Passover in my household. And that's a time when I always have warm memories of my grandparents and of their house. And so I thought I would just share.
Oh, that's nice.
With our audience. That's
really nice. It's a nice little piece of artwork. I know you don't claim great artistic, you weren't the next Chagall, but you were on your way. Not bad.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Thank you.
Well, I too did not dig into something new. My good friend Amanda Aniety, I think, deserves a shout out because she reminded me, she was talking about a coworker she thought was cool and that she thought I would enjoy. I've not met this guy, but he's doing some really cool stuff, digging into the history of where he came from. And it reminded me of a website and also a film, although I haven't seen the film, that captured my imagination over a decade ago. And I always worry that it has been taken down because it used some older technology to, like Flash, which for web design is not a thing anymore. But it is to me like one of the great websites ever built. And it is called Welcome.
I'm dying to know what it is.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And it's not easy. It's not as intuitive as a UX designer might suggest, but it's called Welcome to Pine Point. And it turns out, it's not something that is well known, but it really touched me. And it's a website built to, in part, tell the story of a town that was a built factory town in the middle of rural Canada that, was built by a factory because they were mining in the area, and it built up. It had schools, it had a downtown, it had businesses, it had theaters, it had a hotel, it had a runway for planes to land there. And then the factory closed, and they shut down the town and razed it. And so it disappeared. It was like a place that all these people called home for a generation or two, then disappeared. And no one could go back there because it was just gone. But there was a group of people, especially one guy, who kind of kept it alive through photographs, and he created a little website for it, and he gathered old tapes and videos from it. And these guys who created the site and did the film about it turned it into something that is absolutely like, I'm sure some people would think it was boring and opaque, and I find it completely amazing and touching. Great music by an indie, there's a soundtrack to it by a Canadian band, I think called Besnard Lakes or something, which is like a pretty cool indie band out of Canada. And
is it findable somewhere?
It is, but you got to kind of dig around. I'll share a link, and then you have to kind of you got to find the right places to click to kind of dive in correctly. It's a little obscure in its in construction, but it's like for people who care, who come from a place. I think the reason it resonates for me is because I come from a place that I haven't lived in for so long, but holds this very special place in my heart. In some ways, inaccurate, or isn't that anymore. And so This idea of home and disappeared home and memories of home and people from home, like that, I find that like a powerful topic. And they did this in a way that I've never seen before since, and about this particularly poignant story of a place that disappeared. So anyway, I highly recommend it. You'll have to do real digging to dig it up and go through the site. But interestingly also, and this is an obscure magazine reference, I figured out later that the guys who had created this had also created a very cool magazine from the 90s, and I don't know how long it lasted, called Adbusters. And if you've ever heard of Adbusters, that's a very cool magazine that looked at commercial culture, and
I remember reading things from it a time or two. Yeah,
it was cool. And so it had Adbusters, and this project had nothing to do with each other except for they had creators in common. But it's really wonderful. And shout out to the Canadian government that funded creative work like this. It is a real tribute that some governments are willing to fund their artists more than others, and Canada, I think, has us beat in this regard. Certainly these days.
There you go. And I'll just point out that, just to close the loop on our two wormholes, my grandparents were Canadian, so
perfect.
There you go. Tell us about our next episode, Dave.
Our next episode is featuring Wall Street Journal music critic and one-time editor-in-chief indie clearinghouse Pitchfork. And besides all that, he was my best buddy in elementary school, and we had no idea that we lost touch and did not know that we had pursued musical lives in different ways over the years, or even were living in the same town at the same time. We didn't know any of that until much more recently. So it's also kind of a homecoming of sorts.
Well, that is awesome. And just here's me to wrap up, reminding our listeners that if you like us, please do actually like us. It matters. Subscribe, follow our social media, etc. If you do, we will both provide you with unconditional love throughout the course of our lifetimes, and money just can't buy you that. So please do so, and thank you for listening.
And birds will not target you out in the open. I think we can make that a guarantee of all people who subscribe to this show. And if anything goes amiss in that regard, then we'll try to make right by you.
Legal disclaimer, not an actual guarantee.
Thanks, Lawyer David.
All right.
All right. Good night and good luck.
Ah!